Good morning, everybody. I will be your moderator for today, so I'll be introducing the speakers and reading their bios, brief bios, and a little bit about what they will be talking about. Yes, indeed, you're ahead of me. So I did want to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Christy Strongman, and I'm originally from Central America, Panama. And I want to share something about myself with you, about my identity. Besides being Panamanian born and being multiracial and bilingual, I'm also straight. Gasp. What is a heterosexual doing moderating a queer conference? That is a worthy question. As an answer, I can offer you a brief snapshot of my upbringing. I had the privilege of being raised together with a gay older brother who pointed out things in our world that I couldn't at first see for myself. His brilliant mind, keen observation, and deep, pure feelings introduced me since I was a small child to hidden pathways within my own psyche until this day that propel me to question the status quo of the dichotomous structures of the often oppressive and boring hegemony. My love and adoration for my older brother has always been strong. And I know he loves me even when he's mad, because he would sometimes tell me, "Christy, you're a gay man in a woman's body." This was the highest compliment and still is to this day. I am and have always and will always continue to be a fierce ally for queer folk. That's why I'm here. To you. So, with that said, let the queering begin. First, we have Kanyon Sayers-Roods. I'll read a little bit about her. She is, and you have to excuse me if I fumble on some of the words. Kanyon Sayers-Roods is a Mutsun-Ohlone, and Chumash. She also goes by her given name, Coyote Woman. She is proud of her heritage and her native name, though it comes with its own backstory. And she is very active in the Native community. She is an artist, poet, published author, and activist, student, and teacher, the daughter of Anne Marie Sayers. She was raised in an Indian Kanyon trust land of her family, which currently is the only one of few spaces in Central California available for the Indigenous community for ceremonies. Kanyon's art has been featured in the Day Young Museum, the Somart Gallery, Gathering Tribes, Snag Magazine, and numerous powwows and Indigenous gatherings. She is a recent graduate of the Art Institute of California, Sun Valley, obtaining her Associate's and Bachelor's of Science degree in web design and interactive media. She is motivated to learn, teach, and start conversations around the topic of decolonization and re-indigenization, permaculture, and to continue doing what she loves most, which is art. Kanyon is also the founder of Indian Kanyon Two-Spirit Society, cultural director and COO of Costa Noa Indian Research and Cultural Representative and Native Monitor for Indian Kanyon Mutsun Band of Costa Noa Ohlone people. What we will hear today, Kanyon will be speaking on queering the landscape, Indigenous perspectives on the spiritual ecology of kinship, land, and responsibility. And with that, she will offer an opening song and remind us of the importance of Indigenous land acknowledgments and offer an Indigenous two-spirit perspective on the ecology of the land that we stand on. Help me welcome Kanyon Sayers-Roods.
Mishmin Tuhis, Conrakat Kanyon, Coyote Woman, Sayers-Roods. I just said good day, good morning. My name is Kanyon Coyote Woman, I come from Indian Canyon, which is the only federally recognized Indian country between Sonoma and Santa Barbara along central coastal California. But also, I want to recognize where we are right here, right now. Can I hear you all say Yelamu? Yelamu. Can I hear you say Ramaytush? Ramaytush. And then I'm going to get a little more close to home. Can I hear you say Ama Piritakawas? Ama Piritakawas. You just acknowledged indigenous words and languages of these lands. Yelamu is a village that was here before San Francisco, before this area was known as California, one of those first names. Ramaytush is the language language of the people of these lands here in San Francisco Bay. Actually, the word Ohlone is a way, it's kind of like saying you're from the Bay Area. It's not quite saying San Mateo, San Francisco, Palo Alto. It's a misnomer that I personally identify with, but Ohlone is a misnomer. Same thing with Costanoan. But my mother and myself caretake our nonprofit, which is Costanoan Indian Research, because when the Spaniards got here, they say Costaños, Costaños. They kind of showed up in San Francisco, said Costaños, Costaños. Show up in Monterey, Costaños, Costaños, Costanoan. They didn't find out about the native people, their languages, their way of life, their creation stories. It was outsiders coming in. And so coming from a matrilineal, and one more word. Ama Piritakawas. In the Mutsun language, Ama means people. Pire means land, tak, location, awas, all being from. So technically, you just said people, land, location, all from. Fundamentally, people of this land. And while I offer this song, you are acknowledging that the indigenous peoples who have always been here need to be a part of the conversation and involved with any decision going forward. And you as a community are the people that are here now. So that word is encompassing all of that. It is people of this land traditionally and people of this land currently. Coming from a matrilineal society, my mother and my grandmother have always taught that when song, ceremony, and dancing stops, so does the earth. I too believe that. And I want to offer a grandmother's song to honor our grandmothers, their grandmothers, and in all Mother Earth, for without them and without her, we would not be here. We share this time and space together for a reason. So it's with that humility, that gratitude, that present-mindedness that I offer this song in this space here. And can I get you all to say "oh" in 3, 2, 1? Oh. So that's a little insider tip. If you ever hear any California Indigenous community members offering land acknowledgments or prayers or songs at the end of it, and you're not sure if you should clap, because sometimes clapping is see? That's exactly what it does to spiritual energy. That's exactly what it does to those ancestors who are present around us, and it's waking up. So instead of clapping, you can say, "oh," and it sends it off in a good way, and it's a beautiful way to be in solidarity. So what are we going to do after my song? Oh. All right. Thank you. So I'm really honored to be here. I'm so very happy that the organizers and the facilitators were open and wanted to open this up in a good way. It's so very important that we recognize that the land that we are on. So many times, so many people come up with great ideas and they are like trailblazers towards the future, yet they don't know any of the history of these spaces and places that they occupy, let alone the history of these lands. I'm going to use one example. Well, John Muir, conservation, when you think about protecting land. But did you know he was an absurd racist who hated the natives? Kind of messed up, right? Conservation of land? Yeah, good. Hates the natives. Okay. Think about it. Indigenous peoples have been stewards of these lands for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and of which we have land management practices that that mainstream society is not familiar with, like fire ecology. When it comes to fire management, it's so very important because when you think about, let's say, a sudden oak death is rampant and it's killing, it is leading to the deaths of many oaks. But if we had traditional land management practices with fire, those oaks would be strong, resilient, and amazing. But now when we think about the word fire, everyone freaks out saying, oh no, like huge catastrophic fires. Like those are the unhealthy fires. I'm talking about small little grass fires. They would have been between 3 to 5 years, some of them 7 to 10 years. But when you think about it, we have these agencies, these national parks, state parks, who put a fence around it and say, preserve it, protect it. All of these settlers who came here to California, they said, oh my gosh, California is a natural Eden. Hold up, wait a minute. Indigenous peoples have been stewarding and caretaking these spaces for a very, very, very long time, and history books like to refer to us as hunter-gatherers. The Native Americans are hunter-gatherers. And it's a little frustrating because you're denying the existence of indigenous science. You're ignoring the existence of these indigenous wisdoms, this indigenous technology. And when you don't have that part of the conversation anywhere, you then validate dismissing a perspective that you don't know about. And we don't know what we don't know, so therefore, how do we factor it into any of our decisions in today's modern day? And so I'm going to set these down real quick. So I am a very privileged, unique indigenous individual. I am lucky to say that I have been born and raised on the land of my grandmother's 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 grandmother. That being said, I have been on the receiving end of what is considered Indigenous protocol. And Indigenous protocol is recognizing the people who've always been here. So when people would come to Indian Canyon and visit my mother, they would bring her gifts and then seek her consent to engage in a conversation to then pursue something that they possibly may have wanted or are thinking about. Let's say someone wanted to come up, they're planning a coming-of-age ceremony for their youth. And so if they are wanting a coming-of-age ceremony, they will find out where they want to have that happen. So they come and visit my mom. So instead of saying, oh, by the way, we're going to show up here and we're going to do this, they come to her and say, with the offering, may we have some of your time? Is it possible we speak to you about something coming up? And then my mother can consent. Consent culture, what a concept. And then they have a conversation saying, well, our youth is transitioning from youth to adulthood. We wanted to have a ceremony on the land. Would it be possible that we have this here? And these are the potential dates that we're planning this. And then my mother can consent or not. And sometimes she'll even say, well, talk to the land. And they will go out and listen. And there have been people who've come back saying, maybe this is not the right fit. And then some say, oh my gosh, these beautiful things happened. And my mom goes, then it's meant to be. And there are times that that kind of protocol is mandatory. And then as I come out to the Bay Area, I recognize that I'm a Southern Ohlone from these natural lands. So I also respect Indigenous protocol. Even though I could say, like, my ancestors are from here in the Bay Area, and I could totally be advantageous over these facts, I humble myself and recognize that, yes, these are my relations. My ancestors are relatives to this area, but at the same time, I'm still a visitor too. And so I recommend that you start learning about the Indigenous peoples of the lands that you visit, that you work on, that you travel through, because by including those community truths, that knowledge, You are raising awareness of something that has been painfully ignored, disregarded, and thrown to the side, which is so important. Because when we think about let's say our feelings around recognizing Standing Rock and recognizing that amazing monumentous occurrence and how it brought people together, and it's revitalizing and connecting. Beautiful, right? Same thing happened during the occupation of Alcatraz in 1969. Now it's coming on the 50th anniversary. And that's why I say, I'm like, you heard about Standing Rock? Well, Alcatraz was the first Standing Rock. And that occupation was by indigenous peoples and non-indigenous peoples coming together in a good way. And there were some California natives. They did reach out to the local community, of which I don't think many participated. I do know some Pomo and some Miwok relatives were on the island occupying it as well. And I think actually some East Bay Ohlone even said some of the occupiers were squatters. Because Alcatraz was a sacred space. It's a respected space. It's where the birds were dwelling, and it's that last point of contact on the western edge of the world, that area where some of our community members believe that that's where the ancestors rested and then went. And so that space should be respected, and I really love that those visions came through Leneda Warjack, who prays to the sun during the sunrise ceremony, because when we come together as community, at the same time when we honor truth and history, we can go forward in ways to honor the past to shape the future. So I am Indian Canyon's Two-Spirit, I'm the founder of Indian Canyon Two-Spirit Society. I identify with she, them, and coyote, and so I'm ambiguous, fluid at times. And it's so very important that we start to notice these facts of history that aren't always brought to the surface. Like, it's really, I have like this really pained feeling. I was really sad how excited I got, because it was also a heartbreaking moment. When I witnessed an article written by Deborah Miranda, who wrote about how in her research she found documentation about recognizing our third gender community within some of the Mission and Spanish records, where they called our community Hoyas, gems. And they said, oh yeah, the Hoyas, they're looked at, or the community really likes them. And there was one where it said, in excess of 40 Hoyas were engaged in sodomite behavior. I was sitting here like, dang, pre-colonial sex is queer as fuck. Sorry. So I'm just sitting here like, yes! And then I'm sitting here like, it's really painful that I have to get excited about that kind of writing. Like, I'm like, yes, it exists, so it's proof that our communities have that we have validated, documented reference. But when it comes to honoring these truths, it's important that we ground ourselves. Anywhere you go, all of our communities have medicines. I personally don't I don't really like the word shaman. I'm just going to come out with it, because that word comes from the community over by Siberia and Tibet. That is one word of one community. So when you think about how colonization has impacted us all, as well as how privileged, accessible anthropologic data has been limited to the privileged few, especially in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe some 90s. So when you think about that privilege, you think about that access, you have these non-indigenous peoples going to these indigenous communities, and then because they learn something over there is a word for those kind of people that do that kind of thing, they then take that and go, oh, that's what they're doing over there too, so let's just apply that. Instead of saying, hi, local indigenous community, may we ask how you identify yourselves? What a concept. So I get a little flustered when I see that word, Native American shaman, because our communities have doctors, our communities have healers, our communities have medicine people, our communities have our two-spirited community, which two-spirit is a way to identify those who bring that balance to the masculine and feminine that doesn't belong on the binary. Well, it's not of polarized of the binary, it's a plane, it's an existence, but it's also a spiritual, sacred connection. So some community members may say, oh, that's just the Native American version of the LGBTQ community. And not fully. There's a little bit more responsibility in it. When you think about, let's say midwives, doulas, when we think about mediators between, let's say our community is having a dispute between a lot of the men and a lot of the women, who's able to truly empathize with both? Because if you have one from each other, they're going to be thinking and have that agenda of that community. So if you have someone who can empathically engage and understand the perspectives of both, you have that community member who brings that unity. And a lot of this information, a lot of it's true to our DNA, and it's true to the documents that are coming up to the surface, and it's true to our dreaming community who are waking up. And I also have a frustrated relationship with that word woke. Woke. I'm woke. It's like, it's an ongoing process. You need to continuously do the work. You can't just be like, oh, I learned how to be a good ally, a clock-in ally, and I'm woke, and it's all of a sudden like they're walking some missteps. It's like, you got to keep up the work. Keep it up, keep it up. So when I talk about those, I kind of like, I do appreciate it. It is a step towards a good future. At the same time, I'm like, I have a little higher standard, like, don't say you're woke, say you're waking. And so when it comes to just grounding ourselves, whenever I visit anywhere, I recognize the Indigenous community and the peoples. And my mother taught me that we thank all life systems. We appreciate and we humble ourselves in our accountability towards how we impact others. When she and I visit classrooms and we talk to students, we say, you're going to be in a position of power and decision, where your decision will not only impact yourself and your community or your environment, but you need to consider how your actions and words will impact everything, how it will impact the environment, how it will impact the next 7 generations in the future. And it is in that recognizing Indigenous pedagogies can yield insights to help us bridge gaps in today's capitalistic, consumeristic, disposable society that is of the entitled, privileged, settler, colonial mentality. And say that twice. And so when we think about like how some of our behaviors have been ritualized from needing instant gratification and convenience, what are we doing it at the expense of? When it comes to, I'm not gonna be rude to those who really do need straws, because I really hate this whole ban on straws when the single-use cup and the single-use lids are still there. Frustrating as all heck. But our whole patterns and behaviors, some of us, there's still a few elders and generations that remember when there weren't plastic bags in stores. And many community members remember the milkman and remember Coca-Cola bottles being sent back to Coca-Cola to be refilled. So these patterns, these behaviors are new. And then we feel like we're so entitled to them. And we think this is practice and procedure, business as usual, when in all actuality it's not. And so breaking that down, decolonizing the way we do things, questioning where these practices and ideas came from is so very, very necessary. And so when I voice that we humble ourselves, my mother and my grandmother have always taught, thank those life systems. So when I visit classrooms, I tell students that if I have my medicine bag, which sometimes has tobacco, or if I don't have anything, I will sing, or I'll offer even my hair. I'll make an offering to the plants. And I'll thank it for the life that it lives and the gift that it gives. And I will appreciate it and let it know where it's going. I'll even sometimes ask, do you want to come with me? I'll look around to make sure I'm not impacting the environment. So thinking about sustainable, ethical harvesting practices, integral and accountable, by recognizing that even if, how many of y'all are omnivores? Because I'm an omnivore. And how many of y'all are vegetarian? So even if you're omnivore, vegetarian, vegan, you still have to impact a life. You have to take a life, or at least impact a life to sustain your own. Because yes, you could peel leaves off of kale, but at the same time, you have to take the whole head of lettuce if you want to. A lot of businesses are taking the whole head of lettuce, which you're taking the entire life. So you have to impact and take a life to sustain your own. Are you not validating that life? And when we thank it and appreciate it, we're being accountable to how we're impacting it. And of course, many doctrines and various religions have their humbling moment of appreciation before a meal. But are those practices being engaged upon in the harvesting? And so when I tell students, thank the life that's lived and the gift that's given, consider ethical and sustainable harvest, don't take more than a fifth, and think about how the animals and everything else is working, like considering the pollination process and the accessibility for those animals. Because now people are so like, oh, I don't like bugs, let's spray. Well, those little pollinators, those little bugs that are feeding the birds, that are feeding the other animals, that are pollinating and being helpful, for our inconvenience, we're destroying an extreme amount of our ecological diversity. And then we feel entitled to engage with these medicines in a fashion like, well, we're all humans of the earth and we all deserve access to this. We all deserve it because we're all entitled to it, right? Sorry. As a native person who's a caretaker of land, it's really frustrating when people go, well, it's all natural and it's all nature. We deserve to go anywhere in these spaces. And like, I'm going to use the Winnemem-Wintu territory up by towards Shasta, where they have a sacred spring. Just because there isn't walls around it with, let's say, a lovely cross on top that validates that it's a sacred space, doesn't mean that people can disrespect, disregard, and desecrate a sacred site. So many people are familiar with these various doctrines who have walls and buildings to say this is a sacred space, this is a safe space. Like, let's say as a native, I wouldn't walk into a church and build a fire saying, well, this is my sacred way of engaging in this environment. No, I'd respect those spaces. And so when it comes to those springs are the sacred waters of the indigenous peoples of the land who have always been caretaking that space. So when you think about how we impact the world, and yes, how we are all humans and we all have mixed bloods, and we all do deserve to connect, sometimes we need to humble ourselves and not be so entitled. And when we thank those plants, we thank these environments, we thank these spaces, we recognize that we're impacting a life and the next generations. And so when we start being more accountable, we have an opportunity to respect that. And so I want to open this up to you. I'm kind of curious if anyone has inquiries on any level about Indian Canyon, about myself, about identity of Two-Spirit community members, our ecological impact, and all of the above. Anything else too, if I missed it. Oh. You're all silent. Oh.
Hello. We ask you to come here if you want to make a question and say your name for the records, and we're filming everything, so you also know that you're going to be on camera. Everything is going to be free online afterwards. We're not live streaming. We ask people not to live stream, please. That's part of the policy.
Oh, and I want to introduce
we have also another mic over there, so you can come to either direction.
Mutsun-Ohlone is going to sit on the microphone here. Y'all can ask about him too.
Hi, I'm Nick Zellen. I just wanted to start by thanking you for your time and for starting off the conference in such a wonderful way.
Thank you.
And I wanted to hear a little bit more about your experience as a Two-Spirit person in your community and what that has looked like for you.
Ooh, that one's fun. When I came out as bisexual and then slowly as a polyamorous person, a lot of people did the stereotypical that's a phase thing. And you know what? It's okay. It can be a phase because we all are growing, shifting, ebbing and flowing. We don't have to prescribe to a single label. And as a fluid individual, that flows. So it can be a phase and take that on, but not a phase of like, as a default, this is how life is supposed to be. It drives me nuts when people say like traditionally this, that, and the other, when maybe they don't know. And so I'm sitting here like, polyamorous communities exist in indigenous communities, and that normalized behavior is natural, but like these doctrines have forced their colonial perspective on things, which is so very painful. And so coming out, I've been accepted, I've been loved, I have a charismatic type of personality, though I do feel some of that pushback, that colonial mindset, like, I choose to be natural. So arms, natural, legs, natural. And the funny part is like super furry, but then none. And so even when I run into some of my cousins who are male, they try and be like, well, that's not, like, girls are supposed to shave. I'm sitting here like, why? and if they try to say like traditional or not, I'm sitting here like, yeah, because you totally engage with all of our ancestors to validate that fact. And I think someone was telling me women when colonization was happening and people were coming back and forth, when they went home, some natives, hey, we're hairy, and some not as much. So not the whole, you don't look native. Most natives have high cheekbones and less hair. The trend of hairlessness got popular over there. So I'm sitting here like, I gotta look that up. I gotta look up the history of shaving and such, because many nations shaved. Like, when you have obsidian, that cuts. So our communities did shave and didn't shave, and we're humans. We ebb and flow and we evolve. So I don't like when people say traditionally women are supposed to or women aren't. So rewinding to experiences as a two-spirit individual, thankfully I've been appreciated. Like, as the founder of Indian Canyon Two-Spirit Society, our small little community is growing. We're trying to find out when we're going to have a camp out someday soon. And just small moments of educational outreach and connection to the community. So I've been blessed, but this usual societal stereotypical pushback is some of the experiences I've had in urban areas. Oh!
Hello, I'm Peter. Thank you so much. I just would like to know more about what happens at Indian Canyon.
Ooh, yeah.
With regards to two spirits involved with plant medicine ceremonies, sacred ceremonies, those kinds of things.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah, Indian Canyon serves as a safe haven for Indigenous people in need of land for ceremony and for educational outreach. So we have both Indigenous communities of many nations come up, and then we also have field trips by appointment and community opportunities to gather, and a lot of volunteering and internship opportunities because we're a 501c3. That being said, our Two-Spirit Campout has been a space for all levels of decolonization, from those who are just taking their first steps of possibly stepping out of that space to come into themselves from closets or just maybe even their own self, and then all the way to those who are like fighting the decolonization fight and educating as much as possible. So we have all ranges, and so at some of our Two-Spirit campouts, we've had intertribal teachings. So not just California Native, because intertribal communities need to come together and find our commonalities. So we actually had like drumstick making, so Bates drum community can teach songs. So everyone got to invest in their drumstick, which is beautiful. We had just cultivating a relationship with plants, so I taught that practice of thanking the plant and appreciating it, because there's medicines that grow on the land, like, let's say mugwort, which is an amazing aromatic medicine, which also was known as a Plan B opportunity. They always say, like, if you're carrying, don't work with mugwort, or what is it, wormwood, because it helps. Well, if you're late. Women cycles. If you're late, it'll help induce. And the same thing, it'll discourage anything latching on, and it'll help flow and release. Granted, I don't know all the exact prescribed amounts, because many Indigenous peoples and many peoples from other territories too also have not had a chance to be proud of that knowledge. And I encourage you to look up. One thing is, I really do believe that when non-Indigenous peoples gravitate toward Indigenous spirituality, it's their own ancestors calling them. It's their own ancestors calling them to their own earth-based spiritual practices. And today, we are byproducts of our colonial capitalistic society, so we're engaging in what we're taught. So therefore, when we see a connection, we gravitate to it, and of course, we want to be a part of it, and we try and find out how to have a relationship with it. And sometimes that means, do I buy a ticket? Do I learn about it and then repackage it and present it as my own? I have a deep extra tangent if any of you want to have a conversation about how people repackage stuff. Permaculture, how people repackage stuff. Core shamanism, how people repackage stuff without being accountable to Indigenous communities. Right? So I have a lovely tangent on that. And so when it comes to connection to culture and spirituality, it's just how we're accountable. Because all of us have been impacted by colonization. All of us have ancestors with Indigenous lineages, of which have been connected to the lands of their ancestors, and we could all celebrate and be proud of when we start our own decolonization process. So I believe that's necessary. Any other last-minute questions? I can go on forever, trust me.
Thank you, Kanyon. I really appreciate all you said, except maybe the part of fur, like as a Brazilian. No, just kidding.
Upcycle, recycle.
The Brazilian wax thing? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I want to say, I would like you to I'm playing. I would like to if you can talk about, like, do you think that the plants have gender, or maybe talk about like tobacco or what plants you use, and do you think they're feminine or masculine or?
Well, who was it that was telling me about mycelium? There's more than two. When it comes to the multitude of the plane of existence, sometimes our constructs, we have male-bodied and female-bodied energies and beings and masculine energies, but there's so many diverse ones, and the fluidity of it. Nature has the ability to shape and shift, to procreate as to asexually, and also, what is the other one where you can have your own children, duplicate? Thank you. I love botanists, and I love those science energies that I don't have skills at. And so I can't say exactly, I can only say what I feel. No one's taught me this, no one's voiced, like, comes from this culture, this tradition. I do believe there's energies and powers and wisdoms from the medicine community. Just because they don't have faces and they don't talk and walk around like us doesn't mean that they're living beings and entities that are full of wisdom, knowledge, understanding, and energies. And so, finding the feminine and masculine, I do believe that there are some that carry that, especially when you think about flowers. When you think about flowers and all of those amazing little pollinators wandering around, but then of course, don't you love pollen? Don't you love the season of pollen when it's just like, oh my gosh, it's a hay fever and all these, it's just like, yeah, plants are procreating all over you. It's awesome. Plant sex. Sorry. And so I do believe that I couldn't like name ones and be like, yeah, that's more masculine. Oh, that's more feminine. But I do feel it, and I do believe that. And so if that makes any sense. And just the other day, Mutsun-Ohlone turned into a little pollinator. I visited Filoli for their first Pride event ever, which is awesome. And Filoli is in Woodside, which is Ramaytush Ohlone territory, so the language of this land, further down south. And he was visiting different flowers, so he popped his head in and then wiggled around and then went to another one. And so Mutsun-Ohlone turned into a pollinator, so I recommend you go check out some of his recent posts. He's on social media. He's met Waynona LaDuke. He's been at Pioneers. He's been at the Global Action Climate Summit. He was at Soul to Soul Solutions March, the Rise March here in San Francisco, fighting back against the Global Climate Action Summit. I'm a fence crosser. And so think about the pollinators and think about how some of our decisions are impacting them. Because if we think, oh, this is inconvenient to have all these little bugs, if we choose to poison, that poison impacts their entire livelihood, which impacts not only them, but it impacts the birds, it impacts the other animals, it impacts the plants, it impacts our food. So we're kind of screwing ourselves when we think about our convenience because we have a reactionary, colonial, settler, entitled mentality of like, let's fix it. Let's like make reference to Australia really quick. Australia, when everyone visited, they brought some rats. And then they said, oh, let's fix this. Let's get some reptiles. And then they bring reptiles and realize one's nocturnal and one's not. So now you brought two invasive, damaging species to an area due to your reactionary, let's fix it quickly attitude. And now you're impacting the indigenous species in a detrimental fashion. And so today's modern day colonization is gentrification. But when we come to our solution building opportunities, don't react and don't just push your agenda. Invest and witness the community. Find out and engage in consent culture and find out ways that you can work together versus just like, oh, I know what to do here. Let's just do this. Invest in the native peoples. So that's kind of my biggest agenda lately. How many minutes are we at? Ooh, a few more minutes?
We have more time for questions if
Sweet.
anybody want to come up. I'll bring the mic to you.
I'm a
Do you
coyote,
mind
but I don't
coming up?
bite.
Okay, I'll bring it to you. So it's important that we get it on the mic so we can, people can hear it
you.
afterwards.
Hi, I'm Terry. I just wanted to make sure. I think that you're telling us this little character, Romy something, is another persona of you that is on some social media that we could follow. I'd very much like to follow it.
Yes.
Could you spell that or tell me where to look?
This little figurine, who has been in other people's hands too, his name is Mutsun-Ohlone, Romingohlone, Mutsun-Ohlone, no spaces. He's on my website. He's hosted on my website. So I am a consultation firm where I am committed to bridging the gap between Indigenous and contemporary value systems. I offer cultural competency trainings, Indigenous insights, professional development opportunities for teachers, because I really want to teach the teachers about how their messaging comes across about the existence of Native peoples. How would you like it if you heard, Ohlone people were here, and they used to do stuff like that, versus the Ohlone people, this is the territory of what we consider Ohlone people, and the community are stewards of the land, and many of them are doing amazing work for their community now. So he's an accurately depicted Native figurine in his regalia. No, Indigenous peoples do not wear costumes. The same way we don't offend the Pope saying, "Hey Pope, I like your costume." Native people don't wear costumes. He's in his regalia, and he's an educator, edutainer, and he takes selfies with people. So, yeah. Oh, he's on hashtag on Twitter. He is on Facebook, his own page. He is on Instagram. So if you do the hashtag, on my website, Kanyon Consulting, both with Ks, .com/roaming Ohlone is his hosted space. And on Google Photos.
Hi, my name's Laura. Thank you so much for your talk. My question is, I am curious about what the terms masculine and feminine mean to you. And I ask that question just because as a room full of lots of queer people, I know this is something that a lot of us think about and define and go all kinds of ways with. So I'm just really curious about your perspective.
Ooh. My own personal perspective, there are spaces for all of these energies. So when it comes to like gendering tasks, let's say, okay, male bodies, masculine energy is a strong form, and sometimes even various steps of linear thinking or strategy, and then there's a feminine energy of this ebb and flow that's a web-like of think, and then there's the in-between. And so in our community, we do have gendered roles. From the dominant amount of our hunters were dominantly male, and there were some in-betweens, and the same with, let's say, our basket weavers. A dominantly feminine space. So if someone was more feminine energetically, their talents and their skills and their presence in the community would be welcome. But of course, it was a gender type space. And so my own personal relationship with it is I really hate this post-colonial energy of this toxic masculinity and this hyper-femininity and this hypersexualization of femininity and this denial of masculine being more encompassing. So I loved watching the documentaries, Misrepresentation and The Masks We Wear. Very necessary. I think that should be pushed in every school. But they should have a continuation to encourage more opportunities of our variant, fluid, as well as other gendered or mixed community. So we can include LGBTQI, Two-Spirit, all of the above. And so I do know that there are roles for our community because we do have strengths and we do have abilities. And so the defining points of them, I wouldn't try and prescribe them, only because it would just be more labels of just forcing that kind of energy. And it's like, oh, this kind of feels this way. And sometimes it is a certain kind of energy. And it's helpful that we can embody all of those. So not just male-bodied peoples embody masculine energies. And the same thing with female-bodied peoples, not just embody the feminine energies. There's balance. We could bring that. We could bring that assertive energy that is aggressive and strong and not be called masculine. And or sometimes I will pull off that masculine stuff. So I personally, I'm still my own self. Diving into that and finding that balance, because I am in the 21st century questioning the world and opportunities and open-mindedness, and I also am connected to my culture and my community, and I'm also diving into what parts of my culture and community have been colonized and what parts are traditional. Because yes, some of our traditional community really do believe certain really strong facts, the same way colonization and colonial entities have imbued their value systems upon us, and that's their traditional sense of roles and systems. So I'm like, okay, am I pushing back in my own culture by being curious about this? But there are certain things that feel true and are right, and I pray on them and wait on them and find my relationship with them. So I'm still working and decolonizing myself and my work. So I slip too. That's the biggest thing, is it's a healing process. We're not going to get things right. The same thing when we acknowledge our peers in our communities, gender pronouns, we're going to slip. Those of us, I slip. Think about the accountability. I might say we, but I also have to say I. I have myself slipped, and I have witnessed some of my community slip, so I'm saying the word we. It's a learning process. So be forgiving, be patient. And yes, you can react, but breathe it in. So instead of civility politics, like, oh, calm down, or why can't you be more conducive of our learning together? No, everyone has their right to be true to themselves, but we should also be forgiving towards each other and patient with the other peoples who might not be abiding by civility politics. You're not entitled to someone being civil towards you. So the other end of that. Yeah. Woohoo! So hashtag Roaming-Ohlone, Kanyon Consulting is offering consultation, and follow me on social media. Ask me questions. I love conversations that continue. I'm going to be wandering off and then wandering back, and I will be here tomorrow. So thank you so very much for your time, your love, your patience, and welcome to Ohlone territory.